All right, I think I've only met a few of you. So I'm Amanda. I have just surpassed 3 years since my stroke. Um, yeah, it was a week before my 39th birthday. I was working out and proceeded to have a stroke, a pretty significant one. The doctors phoned in my husband, said, "You need to say goodbye." It was like in the thick of COVID. He couldn't really come in, but they let him come in because they all thought I was going to die. They were quite convinced I was going to die. And I didn't very clearly. Um, anyway, so that was just over 3 years ago. The stroke affected me totally differently. So I'm in Calgary. And Annie, correct me if I'm wrong. I think you are too. Yeah. So I'm in Calgary and I woke up a couple days later and all I could see around me were beds of old men, old, old men, and no idea what had happened to me. And went through the gamut of testing. They thought I had COVID. I did not have COVID. Ended up, I had a PFO, and which I've still never had closed. And I've made the choice not to have closed. And yeah, so recovery for me was a little bit different because where the stroke went was right in, and it has a name that I can't ever remember. I call it my hippopotamus, but it's something better than that. And really, it affected my emotions. I was diagnosed with cognitive aphasia, but really, it only kind of comes out when I'm tired. Um, I have a little bit of numbness down the left side, but no paralysis. So I know I'm very fortunate, but I was completely hammered with everything emotional. I went through a period where they thought I had bipolar. I went through a period of severe, severe depression and just suicidal ideations. Like I didn't want to exist. And it's not that I didn't want to exist. And what I've learned over time was I did want to exist. I just wanted to understand how I felt. And my feelings didn't make sense to me right away. And it didn't help that coming up to my stroke, I was also very anxious, depressed. And now all of a sudden it was intensified and nobody could help me. Nobody could help me because nobody knew what was wrong with me. And so I really struggled for a long time trying to find somebody who could help me, I suppose, put a name to my trauma. And then once I eventually realized where my stroke had happened and what this was essentially brain damage that probably was never going to get fixed, then it was okay. Now I've got this. How do I fix it? And I went through therapy. I went through trauma therapy. I went through psychotherapy and realized it's not just therapy I need. And like a stroke is a pretty significant trauma, pretty significant. And I kind of went for a long time with, it was almost like survivor's guilt because, I didn't necessarily fit all the boxes of everybody else I had talked to that had a stroke. I didn't have paralysis or aphasia or all the other gamut of things that you can get. And like I said, I knew I was fortunate, but I still knew I was just a tad bit broken. And anyway, so I've spent the last 3 years trying to fix it. And I think the biggest thing for me and the biggest tool that I came across was acceptance. Acceptance is hard. Acceptance took me a really, really long time. But I just sort of had to accept this is what happened. This is my life. It sucked. It really sucked, but it doesn't have to suck still. And one of my biggest things that I had to do, thank you, Ella, was I had to change the way I thought about things. Was no longer really referring to it as, well, it was still a big thing. It was really changing my internal narrative, going from, I don't want to be here. My life sucks. I don't want to exist, to, wow, I get to be here. My life is great. I do want to exist. And for me, that was just the hugest shift once I changed my mindset. And yeah, like, I mean, I think stroke recovery is something that takes your entire life, but it's not as hard as it used to be. It's better. You know, it's nice having a support group, even when I can't always join them. It's hard being in Calgary and then coming to a meeting at 5 o'clock when you work an hour away. But when I can be here, this is what I want. I need community. Community is great. Community has really helped with my recovery. For the first year and a half, I used to text with Saj and Instagram with Ella. I watched all your Instagram videos and all your YouTube videos at least 32 times. They were helpful. But the biggest tool, like I said, for recovery for me was acceptance.
Can you talk a little bit about how you sort of not forced yourself to accept your circumstances, but like how you kind of um, made your way to acceptance?
Yeah, so I I focused a lot of time on my faith. My faith was incredibly important to me, and just holding on to something, whatever faith is to one person. For me, it was holding on to that one person, in that this happened for a reason. You know, it was no longer, it happened on purpose. And then it was more about, okay, now that this happened on purpose, what is my purpose? And my purpose, in order to find my purpose, was I needed to really truly be okay with what just happened. So that's when I leaned into my faith. I leaned into community. I started taking more time for myself, to listen to myself, listen to my body. And that was huge, because for 40 years I never did that. I never listened to myself. And when I did finally sit down to listen to myself, that's when I realized what I needed the most was acceptance. I spent a lot of time learning how to meditate. And for a year, it was boring. It was terrible. It was boring. I hated every second of it. And then I loved every second of it, just by having that opportunity to just be with yourself.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Uh, Meditation is the thing that I always go away from the easiest because it's like, I don't have time for that today. But then when I'm really stressed or anxious or whatever, it's like I should meditate in order to like ground and all of the things. It's the For me, it's the first thing that I let go of, you know. But the also the first thing that grounds me back to my center. Yeah.
You know, it's kind of like Ferris Bueller. I always come back to Ferris Bueller with the whole, if you don't stop to look around every once in a while, you're going to miss it. Like you're going to miss life.
Yep.
And that was so important because I never stopped. I never stopped. And then I was forced to stop.
Yep.
And then I was like, you know what? It's kind of great to have this opportunity to pause and see the world and feel your feelings and be okay with your feelings. Forrest Bueller was, or Ferris Bueller was a smart man.
I love the quote that Ella just put in the thing, the chat. In order to find my purpose, I needed to lean into what happened. How Amanda began to accept. That's great.
I think that's such a easy way to explain how to begin accepting. Because if I was asked that question, I don't even know if I can come up with an answer. And that was really it. So thank you. And I hope everyone can take that away, no matter what stage of their journey that you're in or that they're in. Um, and I, first of all, I appreciate your amazingly kind words. Thank you so much. And I'm so like happy is saying so happy is not exactly what I feel because I think there's no exact words for it, but I am so happy for you and where you are in your journey in your life. Like it's incredible to watch and to have seen you like go through that journey over the past 3 years. I can't believe we've known each other for that long.
I know.
Right?
Well, and I joined the first couple of meetings and I kept my camera off and I just sat back and cried. And then I was like, wow, this Ella chick, she knows what she's talking about. I bought the mug, I bought the hoodie.
Thank you so much.
But
And
I
I,
think
I
that really the
continue.
biggest thing was to change that narrative. And I tell myself that over and over and over again, even if it's just so simple as, I'm frustrated because I can't get my shoe on. Like my left foot doesn't always like to do what it's told. And I get so frustrated. And then I'm like, wait, shift. And then I have to tell myself to shift that narrative. Yeah, but I can still feel my foot. I still have my foot. And then I focus on my other foot. And then it doesn't seem so bad.
Yeah.
Amazing. I love that. And I'm so happy you're doing that, putting it into real practice. And I think that's
Mhm.
what we all need to do, stroke or not, really. In one of my Instagram videos, I say that the way you speak to yourself or your narrative is like the marketing for your own life. Like we look at television commercials and marketing and like, that toothpaste is good, whether we think consciously about that or not. We'll reach for that toothpaste next time we're at the store because it seems appealing. So, how you talk about yourself, well, how do I want to make myself seem appealing? Like, not just to other people, but to me, right? And that's your narrative. And I love that you're doing that.
Yeah, I lost a lot of friends too when this happened. A lot of friends were just kind of not what I needed anymore. So I had to make myself my own best friend, my own only friend at times. And I kept saying to myself, is this how I talk to a friend? And if the answer was no, then I didn't talk to myself like that anymore.
Yeah. Such
Now,
good.
I'm not saying I don't still have hard days. I still have really hard days. And I'm only 3 years out. My brain's still repairing. And I just have to give myself a little bit of grace, sometimes a lot of bit of grace. Yeah. But it's easier. It's easier than it was 2 years ago. It's easier than it was 2 months ago sometimes.
Yeah. It's not like for me at least, it wasn't like stroke recovery was like, okay, we start at the bottom of the mountain and then we just slowly make the climb up back to the top of the mountain. It's like there's pits and valleys and sideways and blah and plateaus and blah. And it's just like, you just, I'm 7 years out at this point, or 6.5, 7 in April. And mostly it's easier, at this point.
Totally. Yeah. Some days, I'll take 87 steps forward and 72 steps back. And then I'll take like one step forward, one step back. Sometimes I fall on the ground and I just stay there for a day.
Yeah.
I eat some cake and I get the hell up and I keep going. And I think that's what's most important is get up and keep going and then eat some cake.
Yeah. Yeah.
But once I realized I didn't want to stay down anymore, like when I get knocked down, I didn't want to stay there anymore. So yeah, sometimes I have a little cry. I feel sorry for myself for a minute, and then I get the hell up and I keep going.
Yeah, that's I find that that is the attitude of not most survivors, but like a lot of survivors that have turned this into something good or something positive or a benefit of some sort, you know? Not to say that having a stroke is a benefit at all, but you know, like you just accept your circumstances and yeah, it's really great.
But you just explained, Amanda. Well, two things. One, I'm so happy that was recorded because I think we need to like send it to every single television platform for a commercial for just like living your best life. I had got kind of teary eyed there, so thank you. And two, I already forgot. Yep, I already forgot. That's okay, it'll come to me. That's how incredible that was.
Well, and I've been talking with some other people who don't, not necessarily like stroke survivors, but just survivors of trauma. And I mean, everybody has their own trauma. Everybody has trauma that means something to them. And it sucks. It really does. And any sort of big event like a stroke or anything is going to affect you in a super, super terrible way. But you just can't let it beat you. And I was not going to let that stroke beat me. It was not. So I made up my mind and it didn't beat me.
No pressure, no diamonds.
That's right. That's right. Well, and I've really learned a lot about resiliency. You know, everyone kept saying, you're so resilient. You're so resilient. And I was like, no, I'm not. No, I'm not. But every single time I climb myself out of that deep pit and I look down, it reminds me that, yeah, you know what? I am. I am. And my stroke was a huge, huge lesson in that, in resiliency. And we're all resilient. We all have it. We all have the capability. You just kind of got to find it, even on the days you don't want to look for it. It's there.
Incredible. Does anybody else want to unmute themselves and ask Amanda any questions, mention something that resonated with them? It doesn't even have to be a question.
I had something. I appreciated what you said about you mentioned that you were 3 years like post stroke and that your brain is still healing. I myself need to remember that. I am almost, it will be 4 years in January for me. And I had they called it a right thalamic hemorrhagic stroke, like the longest name ever. They had to name that damn thing. Sorry. But it affected my entire left side, and I don't have feeling in my left side at all. um it's quite horrible, but and I get distracted when I talk, so sorry, I went way off topic. But I was just going to say I appreciated what you said about your brain still healing, because some days I forget that, that I'm almost 4 years out and I'll be like, okay, is this it? But then no, your brain is always healing. So it was a good reminder.
Yeah.
So thank you.
My neurologist, so I went to him after about 5 months and I'm like, why am I not better? Like, how come I'm not better?
Yeah.
And he's like, well, number one, it's 5 months. Your brain is still saying, what the hell just happened? He's like,
Yeah.
so you need to take pause. And he explained it, the first 3 years pretty much is your brain kind of getting over the what just happened. The next 3 years is repair. And he's like, come talk to me after 8 years if you still feel like you're not back to yourself.
Yeah.
But I've learned to accept there's some things that will just never be the same, and that's okay.
Yep.
That's okay. But yeah, that's when you just got to give yourself some grace and have patience. Brains are not fingers, they take a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I never knew patience until I had a stroke.
I was just gonna say that about patience. Like, one of the main things that having a stroke has taught me, it's actually taught me a lot of things, but patience was one of the main things that kind of come to mind, because when I was in the hospital after my stroke, I was there for 60 days in a rehab hospital. So patience was needed. Otherwise, I would have lost my mind. I would have escaped somehow from I don't know. So learning to sit with myself and my emotions was huge.
Mm-hmm.
And when you mentioned mindset, that was one of the things that probably saved my life. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I've pre-stroke, old me was always very like, I find the light in the darkest spot. I've always been like that. There's good in everything. And I seriously think that that saved my life.
Sorry, my dogs are going to bark here for a minute. um, they have an opinion too, I guess.
Yep.
But I've had 3 children, and even they never taught me patience like this taught me patience.
Yep.
Now I have more patience with them.
Yeah. I'm with you on that one. I have I have a 17-year-old and a 19-year-old son, and I am more patient with them. I feel like I'm a better mom
Mm.
because I'm home, and because I overworked myself. I was always gone doing something, but now I'm home, and that's, I guess, one good thing from this whole thing, is that I can
And
be home with them. I can make their meals and just be home.
yeah, and I think it's super important on those really hard days is just find that one thing. And even
Yeah,
if it's just something small, hold on to that.
for sure. Yep.
Yeah.
One thing I'll add is both you. First of all, actually, thank you, Shelley, for sharing all of that. Thank you so much for talking about your story and what you're finding helpful. This is exactly what this group is for, and what happens here stays here, except for obviously what's recorded because that's going on YouTube.
Yeah.
But then you know what? I hope and I know other survivors are going to watch this and go, oh my gosh, what Shelley just said, what Amanda just said, what whoever just said, that is so helpful. And so we're paying it forward as we have this conversation, which is so
Sure.
cool. And then so what both you ladies were just saying was your brain is still healing. And I think even I would add to that, as somebody who is 16, almost 16 years out, my narrative now is this also just was like a natural change in my narrative, and that is my brain is always changing. I feel like I don't need to use the term healing anymore. I've just, again, natural change for me. But my brain is always changing. And like, how cool is that? Like, how cool is that our brains are always changing? 20 years from now, 10 years from now, brain's going to be changing. Like, that is so cool. It is the most powerful. Like, yeah, you know what? Our brains were a little bit damaged, or a lot of a bit damaged. And that sucks and that's hard. But how resilient are we that we can change our brains, and be where we are now and be wherever we're going to be 20 years from now? I think that's awesome. And so thank you for pointing that out.